Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, we're re-releasing episode 70, previously titled Ignite Service Through Patriotism. In this episode, Jennie Taylor is going to tell us about her story after her husband, Major Brent Taylor, was killed in Kabul, Afghanistan in November 2018, and how she chose strength and resiliency after tragedy. She and Sean are going to discuss military families and spouses, why we need to take care of those who put their life on the line for us, and the importance of stability in military families. Let's jump back in.
Thanks for joining us on this episode. I was trying to think how we got introduced initially.
It was Linda Cox.
It was Linda. Okay. And I know that, we've had so many common connections over the years.
Yes.
And when we finally came together and
we've probably been in the room before together at several
sure.
ceremonies and meetings without knowing who each other was. So I'm grateful that Linda made that connection to say,
Yes.
Hey, you two need to talk.
And then we hit it off, and I loved what you were doing. I was telling you about what we were doing. And I think that there's so much synergy between our organizations and our
absolutely
common objective of working with military families. So as we start out, could you just talk a little about your history and some of the things you're doing?
So I'm a military family. I am the American military spouse. I was married to a soldier who was in the National Guard for 15 years in the post 9/11 era. And, National Guard is part-time. I say that with air quotes because about half of that time he was on active duty orders. And sometimes the active duty orders took him to Iraq and Afghanistan. And sometimes the active duty orders took him to the local armory here in my home state of Utah, but he was working on support, whether it's translation or intelligence or whatever was related to that war. So we love America, both of us. I mean, you could please define us as patriots. I hope that anyone who knows about us or ever hears our story says, man, those people sure love their country. But with that love of country has come to real sense of duty. And so my husband grew up wanting to join the military. I grew up wanting to serve my country. I never once considered military, Sean. I'll admit it. I'm from a small town in Utah where we love and respect the military, but we don't join it. I'm quick to say that. I thought I'd be married to an attorney or a political figure, who knows what. So I married a soldier right out of college, and he was killed in Afghanistan in 2018 in an insider attack. I tell my kids, for all intents and purposes, he was assassinated by a terrorist who targeted him. And that didn't start my mission to support military families and military kids, but it certainly opened the door and gave me a platform on which to speak. Because before that, I was a stay-at-home mom. I still am. I'm home with my kids as much as I can be. I have an education, bachelor's and master's degree, but I haven't worked in a classroom setting for years. I volunteered quite a bit, but it really was my husband's death that put me in a position to speak to some of these issues that I've always cared about. Like, it wasn't just, my husband died, now all of a sudden I love America and want a platform. But I could take those issues that my husband and I really cherished for the entire decade and a half we were married. And now I kind of have a voice to say, hey, let me speak up a little bit, and not just my own story, but what my story represents. I'm one of thousands of me. There's tens of thousands of kids like mine that have lost a parent in military service. And my husband died at the hand of the enemy, but my father, when I was a child, died by suicide. And though he wasn't in the military, I've survived that. I've lived through that. I've carried the stigma of that in the 90s and in my young adulthood. And even now, we're getting better, but we're not there yet. My husband's youngest brother was a teenager who shot and killed himself several years ago. So my story gives me a background where I have, as all of ours do, I'm quick to say that every one of us, if we made a list of the ups and downs of our lives, we could either be really depressed, really excited, or we could be really self-aware and say, oh my goodness, the path I have walked might help me help someone else who's going to have to walk that same path. So that's where I am, trying to honor military families, trying to have some of these important conversations, the same conversations you're having. And I've got 7 kids. I've got a preschooler and a senior in high school and everything in the middle. Like I said, I used to be a school teacher. I'm a PTA activist at heart. I'm always championing for my kids and their education and their teachers. But I found in this last 4 or 5 years now, a need to champion for the military spouse, the military child, whether it's the active duty child moving around from base to base in those school systems, or kids like mine that didn't necessarily move around, but they're in a school full of civilians who have no idea what a deployment's like.
That's right.
Their teachers and their school counselors don't really even know how to help them through that walk of life, whether the soldier dies or not. And so I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a proud military support, and just looking for any way I can maybe take some of the experiences I have had in my own life and put them to use to have the conversations to help those who are having their own experiences and will still have those experiences.
Thanks for sharing that. Jennie, can you talk about in 2018 what you can recall as Brent was serving in Afghanistan, and you said you had 7 kids, you had little kids. Can you just talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, it was a train wreck. I'm not going to lie. So it was his 4th combat deployment. He'd been to Iraq twice and he'd been to Afghanistan once before this. So we weren't new to deploying. And like I said, he was active duty even longer than that. We weren't new to not being in the same physical space. Our baby was 2 months old on the day he deployed. And her first birthday was 2 days after her father's funeral. We had a flood around the house, which every military spouse listening knows everything goes wrong when dad is gone. Like for whatever reason, karma, Murphy's Law, whatever you call it. So we thought it was a small leak from an upstairs pipe to a downstairs, and it ended up gutting our house, and we needed temporary housing. And I have this nursing baby and a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. I mean, it kicked my butt, Sean, and I consider myself a fairly driven person, certainly committed. Never once did I say, oh, I hate the Army, they've done this to us. But it was hard. And in fact, from January to October of that year, I would say was harder than the moment we found out Brent had been killed. And that's a pretty bold statement, because it wasn't easy to hear Brent had been killed. It was a shock we never considered. We were naive in thinking that would never be us. We didn't have those what if. We probably should have conversations. But those 10 months of trying to keep my head above water, trying to keep my kids somewhat emotionally stable, trying to pay the bills and fight the insurance and get the kids out the door to school every morning, it was a new world for me. And I'd been through deployments before. I'd been through pregnancy and nursing before. I'd been through all of that before, I thought. And maybe that was part of my problem, as I went into it thinking, I got this, I know what I'm to expect. And I think that's when God or karma laugh at us the most and say, well, let's take you to the next level. So it was awful. It was difficult. I felt like I was just stumbling down a mountain and I could never get my feet under myself. And at the same time, it was an incredible period of growth.
How did you manage that every day? I mean, what was it that pulled you through?
Well, to be honest, I think it really was that shared commitment. The fact that I knew what my husband was doing and where he was doing it mattered. I've talked to other military spouses who maybe aren't as shared in that commitment, and it's easy to hold it against the military, hold it against Afghanistan, hold it against the government. And fortunately, that was never my battle. My battle was more just, how in the world am I going to do this every day? But what I was saying, incredible growth and incredible service given to our family. So again, I live in a community that does not have a high number of military members, but it has a great respect for military and freedom and the cause of all these beautiful things. And so I think it was nearly every day that year, literally, that someone brought us dinner or checked on us or picked up the kids and it's tricky because as a mom, there's only so much you can delegate. Like I'm literally the only one that can nurse that baby, but I'm also the only one who might be able to calm down the 2-year-old if he wakes up at 2 a.m. And the 12-year-old that's just had her father deploy and she's aware of what war is. And so her anxiety is totally different from the separation anxiety of her little siblings. She doesn't necessarily want like a professional counselor or some neighbor to come tuck her in and talk to her. Right. And so God got me through it. My commitment to my husband and his service got me through it, and our community. probably the greatest growth I experienced that 10 months that then helped me face November 3rd, my husband's death date and beyond, was the growth in my ability to receive help. And that's hard. And that's really hard.
It is. At what point did you decide that you were going to take on this battle of being an advocate for military families and especially the Gold Star families?
Yeah, I don't know. Did I decide that? Did you ever decide, Sean, or did it just start to happen? You know what I mean? So if I
can tell you our story. It was a long path to this point, but I just think that it's incredible that soon after Brent's death that you started down this path, that you were going to turn this into something memorable.
Let me tell you the story as I see it now, looking back. And it was little baby steps. For me, it's God. I'm a woman of faith, and I believe there's a higher power directing my path and keeping me on my feet. But call it what you will. My husband was killed on a Saturday morning in Afghanistan. That would have been the middle of the night on a Friday night for us here in the States. I was first notified Saturday morning, my time. And by protocol, I'm supposed to have 24 hours before the military releases his name publicly. There might be the word that, hey, a military member has been killed, but nobody knows who or what or where for 24 hours. And so by the time they told me and my in-laws and my children, it was about noon here in Utah, which meant they scheduled a press conference for noon on Sunday morning. And that was to be the public announcement. Well, you and I both know we live in a world of social media and hypersensitivity and a 24-second news cycle. It's not even 24 hours. And so where I can look back and see my work as an advocate began was 8:30 in the morning on Sunday, less than 24 hours later, when I received a phone call on my cell phone from a national news organization, and I answered the phone. Now, I look back now and think, what in the world was I doing with my phone in my hand? And why in the world did I answer? But again, to me, it was, I answered the phone. It was a woman from New York wanting to interview me when I came to Dover to witness the dignified transfer of my husband's remains. Now, keep in mind, I've never done that before, and neither have most Americans. I'm a very small population that has stood on the tarmac at Dover Air Base and watched a casket covered in a flag be transferred from an aircraft to a hearse with no words spoken, with no, let me go see the body. Like, no, you just watch. But literally hours later, maybe two tops, before dawn, my husband's body came home in the middle of the night. Before dawn, I met in a park off base because the media was not allowed on base, which is great. I'm grateful for that. They weren't allowed to come find me and hound me. I appreciate that. I willingly met with a group of media at a park outside of Dover Air Base at like 6 a.m. the day he came home. And that's the first time I spoke. Now, what did I say? You can go find it on CNN or YouTube or wherever. I sat in my hotel room in the middle of the night, right before going to watch the transfer of my husband's remains. And then after I fine-tuned it, I had my two little boys with me. At the time, they were 10 and 12. They were asleep in the hotel room, so I didn't have any lights on. I had my laptop. And Sean, whether you believe me or think I'm crazy, you can argue all day. I feel like Brent and I wrote what I said. Now, the background of that is my husband was a political figure. In fact, the National Guard reported he was the first sitting politician killed in action since the Civil War.
It's amazing.
He was a small town mayor here in North Ogden, and he embraced the media, not in a seek out the limelight kind of way. But if there was ever a story happening or a controversial project in the city, a lot of government officials kind of deflect the local paper because they know they're going to get it wrong or be blasted. And he always took those calls. He always talked openly, whether it was TV or printed news. I mean, he was still, this is, 5-10 years ago when we still had newspapers and things. We hardly do anymore. But I remember very clearly after he died, when the media wanted to talk to me, I just had such clarity. Brent would talk to the media. He wouldn't hide it. He wouldn't tiptoe around it. And he wouldn't want me to pretend this is only my story. This represents so many other Americans who unfortunately have been to that tarmac and for whatever reason chose not to address the media. And again, I think each of us has our own path. So that's where it began. I addressed the media at Dover Air Base. I spent that whole first year after Brent died very certain that wasn't my personal year of grief. It was a public thing, my city, my state, my country. I spoke at all kinds of ceremonies, not as an invited guest speaker, but as an invited honoree. They were honoring my husband and would I stand in his behalf and accept such and such condolences. And then it would usually end with something like, Mrs. Taylor, would you like to say something? And I feel like God and Brent both helped me open my mouth and say the things of my heart, where sometimes I would sit down and say, wow, I hope somebody recorded what I just said, because I didn't make it up. Do you know what I mean? The words came to me that I almost felt like this must have been what drove our founding fathers. This must be what drives men and women willing to go into battle, or firefighters to run into a burning building. The conviction was so clear and so strong that my own personal grief really kind of didn't matter. It was, how do we give a voice to this? Now then, fast forward, the summer after Brent died would have been his 40th birthday. And I would have thrown him a really obnoxious 40th birthday party for the mayor and all the city. And honestly, Sean, I had wanted to thank that entire city that carried us through the 10 months of the deployment. I planned that birthday party long before he was killed. I knew that, okay, he'll come home in the new year. It'll be summer. His birthday's right around the 4th of July. It's our city festival days as well. We're going to have a birthday party and invite everyone that fed us and carpooled us and listened to me cry and helped fix the plumbing and everything. But then he died. So slowly that birthday creeps up, because guess what happens after somebody dies, Sean? The calendar keeps moving. Right. And it's like the biggest slap in the face. Anniversaries still happen. Birthdays still happen. Holidays still happen. And so as the 4th of July and his birthday approached, I just thought, we're throwing a party. I have more reason to thank the city members now that they've walked me through his death than I ever thought I did when they carried me through the deployment. So we decided to try to have some meaning to the birthday and organize a scholarship in his memory. A lot of people do that after someone passes away. They raise funds, they have a memorial scholarship. And Brent, at the time of his death, was almost done with his PhD at the University of Utah. And so we raised some money. And in my naive mind, we're going to raise $40,000 for his 40th birthday. Now, Sean, keep in mind, I'm a stay-at-home mom. And before that, I was a school teacher, which did not make $40,000 in a year. And now I'm a widow with 7 kids. So $40,000 might as well have been $5 million. But I had a friend who is a business person, and she recommended if I apply for 501c3 status and form a nonprofit organization, more people will donate more money. And believe it or not, that's how what we now call the Major Brent Taylor Foundation was born. It was a birthday party of grief and gratitude where a community came together, and I'm proud to say we raised that $40,000. And now we have scholarship funds that total well over $250,000, and then other endeavors that have come from there. So when did I choose to be an advocate for Gold Star families? I hope the answer is long before I became one. I hope long before I became one, I had that voice and that passion. I know my husband and I both did. We grieved anytime we knew anyone who lost someone. Even, I clearly remember the year or two before Brent died, a highway patrolman died here in Utah in the line of duty. And I remember taking my children to the overpass of the freeway to watch his processional to the funeral and being so impacted. And then 2 years later, I was in a processional just like that, but I was in car number 2 behind the hearse. So when did my love for this country and appreciation for the debt and the gratitude and the sacrifice begin? I think a long, long time ago. When did I get the opportunity to give public voice to that? Hours after my husband died.
Absolutely. Let's bookmark the discussion on the foundation. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
You and I have talked several times about the importance of military families and national security. So much of the challenges of these military families resides in economic challenges and domestic social impact, so the social challenges of these families. Can you talk about being a military spouse, what it was like? I mean, you've given some insight into that, but there are over 1 million military spouses who need to work, who want to work, and it really is difficult for these spouses to even survive. Many of them are TANF eligible individuals living in poverty. If you're an NCO family with kids, that is a real challenge. And it is a national security issue. Can you talk about what that was like being a young military spouse and the importance of taking care of these spouses throughout the U.S.?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. We should be embarrassed that such a number of our military members are TANF eligible and that they do experience food insecurity and that we're not paying them enough. I come from a background of school teachers, also not paid enough, but these are men and women that put their life on the line. Where I first saw the importance of this, and really to your point, the national security connection to this. I was a young spouse. I had 2 children at the time. It was my husband's first combat deployment. He was a young lieutenant, and he and I would have been about 25 years old. But he was deployed to Iraq with a group of Utah National Guardsmen that were put together in an ad hoc unit. They were not a home unit. They weren't people that knew each other and had trained together for years. A call went out for volunteers across the state to fill this critical need on a security force mission. And most of the men in that unit were young. I mean, we were the old couple in that group. You're talking 18, 19, barely. Now, of those young ones, Utah, we tend to marry early in this state. And we had several young soldiers who were married or got married right before the deployment because of the benefits that come with having dependents or what. Maybe half of the marriages survived the deployment, to say nothing of how many have survived it since. Sadly, fortunately, we didn't lose anyone to combat on that deployment, but we've lost, probably 8 to 10% of the men by suicide since then. And it's been 13 years. It was a while ago. But when you look at that, you see men and women in uniform needing to carry a pretty heavy weight, and that is, the freedom of the world on their backs. They do it for a love of duty, a love of country, a determination. You'll find such strong people in our military. But when you take something like financial insecurity and you put that into any marriage with any career, you're going to be gambling with the stability of those personalities, no matter how resilient. I look back to my parents. Like I said, my father died by suicide. He wasn't in the military, but his mental illness led to him not being able to hold a job, which led to financial insecurity, which led to the marriage falling apart, which largely probably led to my father deciding to kill himself. And so we see that if you, as a young soldier, male or female, need to go to work and train and go to deployment or go to whatever your duty is, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, can I feed my family? Can I pay the bills? Now, where will we get the money for Christmas? What about little Jimmy? He's growing and his shoes don't fit from last year. And now he's got to go to school and he needs new shoes. And some of those thoughts, you can't tell me that doesn't distract from the ability of the soldier to focus on the mission at hand. Then you take a troubled marriage, which finances, like I said, can lead to. But you just take that food insecurity or the financial insecurity, and there's no way you can separate that from national security. Because the men and women on whom this nation's security rests have to be able to be of a sound mind and sound body. We require them to run so many miles per minute and do so many sit-ups and push-ups and pull-ups. We require that physical fitness. And then we say we value their emotional and mental fitness and well-being. But when you look to the financial point of it, like you mentioned, spouses, how in the world do you build a career as a spouse if you're moving around the country every 2 or 3 years? Right. Even if you're in a high-paying field like medicine or law, well, you're not barred in that state. You're not licensed in that state. And some of those licensure processes can take months. By the time you're licensed 6 months into a 2-year assignment, you got to start all over again. Not to mention, what do you do during a deployment? So a lot of military spouses maybe aren't even employed outside of the home because the battle rhythm of their military spouse doesn't really allow. Like, there's no way. What would Brent and I have done if I had been a high-paid school teacher while he was deployed? There's no way it would have worked. We would have had to choose not to have children, which can't be the choice we want America's military to make. And so we've got to get to the heart of this, not just unemployment, but underemployment. Childcare for those who go into employment with children in the home. That's unbelievably challenging, even more so in this post-COVID environment. And I would say, Sean, it applies in different ways to each of the components, meaning active duty, National Guard, Reserve, but it applies to all of them. I've never been that active duty family moving from base to base, but I've struggled with childcare. I've struggled with how would I possibly have a job and keep my kids taken care of while their father's literally gone 365 days around the clock. But now I find myself, I'm in my mid 40s, and guess how many dollars I paid into Social Security? Very few. I taught school for a couple of years, making a couple $1,000s a month. Right. My retirement was our retirement. And if our retirement isn't sufficient, then that's got to be something we've got to work on. And so how do we get these spouses the training they need, the security they need, the stability, even just the connectivity? You move every couple of years. Who do you know in that new hometown? Right. You know, some other military spouses, but can they give you the job? Can they give you the training? Do you have the bandwidth to put yourself through school as a spouse when your spouse is always at some kind of army school, you know, maybe not a university setting or a technical trade, but so it's complicated. It's important. It really is vital to our security. We can't have men and women responsible for carrying this country and quite honestly, the world into safety and security if they don't have peace of mind and security for how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to retire, how they're going to provide for their families. And we can't possibly say the answer is don't have a family. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Most people don't understand the barriers of work for these military spouses. Most of these installations are in remote areas where there are very few jobs. Even if there are jobs in the area, trying to get off the base, trying to find transportation, childcare. And as you said, you're there for 2 years, you PCS to another installation, and you start over. And so why I'm so excited to be working with you on this initiative is that where we have built infrastructure around finding military spouses, virtual positions that are adjacent to the installation, and then one of the early initiatives that we had with our military spouse program was the reciprocity initiative, where, as you mentioned, if you are a teacher or a nurse or you have a professional license or certification, it can take years, even sometimes, before that transfers to your new location. And several years ago, we were able to put this into the NDAA and language.
And it did not go unnoticed. Thank you.
And then this new initiative tied to Gold Star families and the work that you're doing, I mean, it really is so synergistic with our work. So talk about the foundation, your focus on, especially the global war on terror, which I think is amazing what you're doing.
I'm super excited. So, you know, there is, the war's over, right? We say that on paper. Global war on terrorism is done, and we left Afghanistan, and we put a bookend on that. That's not to say terrorism was over, and I don't think it's to say war is over. But that particular war took over 7,000 men and women in battle. And that's not to say those that died at home of other causes, which you and I both know the number is much higher. Exactly. But for those 7,000 plus who did die overseas, let's say in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, there's a beautiful memorial monument at Fort Benning in Georgia. You and I have both seen it. It's not just beautiful, it's powerful. And in stone is inscribed the name of every one of those 7,000 plus men and women. And every September, shortly around the 9/11 time period, the National Infantry Museum out there at Fort Benning rededicates that wall. I was able to attend that ceremony in 2019. The memorial was built in 2017, and my husband died in 2018. So we were able to attend shortly thereafter, and it had such an impact. And like I said, I went to and spoke at a lot of ceremonies that first year after my husband was killed. And I'm not going to lie, a lot of them just left you feeling like you've been punched in the stomach, because the whole reason you're there is because your husband's not. And some of the ceremony sides were just so heavy because they spoke of sacrifice and loss and grief, all very true, valid, important things. Don't get me wrong. But what really stood out to me about this beautiful memorial and the ceremonies associated with it at Fort Benning was the celebration of the lives lived. Not just the manner and time of death, not just the fact that there was death, but the fact that they were willing to die. The fact that they fought for something bigger than themselves. And I left these ceremonies, yes, still heartbroken and still a widow, But I left these ceremonies proud of my husband, proud to have his name inscribed in stone along with so many of our countrymen. And so think of Honor Flight, a wonderful organization that takes our older veterans to Washington, D.C., unfortunately, usually in wheelchairs and on oxygen at this age. And we take them to see the Vietnam Wall where names are inscribed. Or we take the few remaining World War II veterans to see their memorial, which is beautifully done in our nation's capital. Our goal as a foundation this year is to take a chartered plane full of global war on terrorism survivors to that memorial in Fort Benning, where they can then see their son or their wife or their brother or their father's name inscribed in those stone tablets, where they can participate in the ceremonies where hundreds of other families like theirs come together. It's a sense of community. It's really easy in your own neighborhood and in your own loss to feel like this is your own grief and nobody knows what it's like. And it's so terrible and sad and many other words. But when you get together in a room full of people and you look around and you realize you've all been to Dover Air Base. You all have a beautiful flag in the shape of a triangle at home that used to be on a casket of someone you hold dear. And without words spoken, there's connection. And that's the kind of connectivity we want to foster. So we're partnering with the National Infantry Museum Foundation in Fort Benning and working to locate here in my home state of Utah. That's where we're starting. We call them GWAT, other global war on terrorism families. Where are they? How can we invite them? Let's get in touch with them. Let's bring them and their families. And our goal is to provide the trip at no cost to the family member, much like Honor Flight does. We'll take them for a couple quick whirlwind days of the ceremonies and the dinner and being with those other families. And then we'll bring them right home, hopefully forever changed. Hopefully they'll feel the celebration and the honor that comes along with the grief and the loss. So we're raising money. Like I said, we're chartering a plane. I've never chartered a plane before, Sean. This is very fun. We had a board meeting and we were talking, should we book a few flights? How many can we take? How much money do we think we have? What should we do? And by the time that hour was up, I just laughed at the end of the meeting and I said to the board, I think we just decided to charter a plane. That's a bold decision for a stay-at-home mom in North Ogden, Utah. So we are looking for partners. We are looking, in addition to taking these Gold Star families, we're looking to take some of our civic and local leaders from our state as well. And that's part of that healing process. We're hopeful to have some of our elected officials and maybe some of the prominent business figures in our community that are well known and looked up to, and bring them on this journey so these families don't only feel supported by each other, because there is this support and a connection from Gold Star to Gold Star. But because my husband was involved with politics, I know a lot of political people. And I know they're just regular, everyday people that happen to have a political office. But a lot of military families don't interact with political figures, and they either have them on a pedestal or way down below. Our goal is to help our Gold Star families see the love and support of our entire community. Bring some elected officials, some business leaders, maybe some civic and educational leaders, so that these families know not only do they have each other's back from survivor to survivor, but the state of Utah has them. Because you and I both know there will be more questions, there will be more paperwork, there will be more bureaucracy. And now these widows more than ever need good employment because they're the widowed parent, not just the spouse. And where do they go? Where do they turn? When my husband was in the military, he had a chain of command. What's my chain of command? Who do I ask? How do I connect still with the military? And maybe if I have paperwork problems or questions, or if I feel lost and forgotten, how do I reach out? I know, and you know, because you know a lot of our elected and business leaders as well, Sean, they're wonderfully compassionate people who would move heaven and earth for our military survivors. I don't know that our military survivors know that and feel that. So we want to create not only the field trip of a lifetime, but we want there to be healing and connection involved as well. So it's quite an undertaking, chartering my first plane, a couple of buses, no big deal. We just need a couple $100,000. So, but you know, we've kind of, my husband used to say, we've crossed the Rubicon. There's no going back. At this point, it's do or die. So we're going to pull it off. It's February while you and I are recording, and the trip is in September. So here we go.
I've been to almost every military memorial in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. And it is this memorial in Fort Benning is every bit as impactful as the Vietnam memorial. And it's surprising to me that it has not been evangelized And I love what you're doing, focusing on this broad scope of this challenge, but also this niche of the members that we lost during the global war on terror. And it's brilliant. I love it.
Well, thanks. We're excited.
Well, we're excited to help you with this and working with the installations, working with the Secretary of Defense and also the municipalities. I mean, I really think that there's an opportunity to get, as you said, the state and local leadership involved in this effort. It is, people forget that, we talk about the Gold Star families and the military spouses. I think it's one of the largest untapped labor forces in the U.S. right now, and they're so in need of high wage employment.
Yeah. And they tend to be really hardworking, dedicated people, just by nature of having been part of that community. You're not looking at a bunch of pushovers who are looking for a handout. These are men and women who put it all on the line day after day. And don't you want them employed by your company or your corporation? Don't you want to bring them into your workforce and give them the greatest opportunities to thrive and grow?
The other thing that you've been doing for some time that it's so emotional for me is that every September you fly this flag over the canyon. Will you talk about that? It's just such an amazing thing. I know it's a little, but
story.
It's incredible.
If you're in Utah, you might be familiar with it. There's a guy named Kyle Fox down in Pleasant Grove, and he runs an organization called Follow the Flag. And he and his team are remarkable. They take these giant flags and they take them to bridges and canyons. And they fly them wherever. And they had flown it. Pleasant Grove, Utah is maybe an hour and a half from our home. And it had been in the paper a few years ago. Well, when my husband was killed, a few of his friends decided, completely unknown, to reach out to this Kyle Fox guy and borrow a flag. And they did. And Kyle Fox was great. He brought his team up. They rigged the flag in this canyon. And it was actually in November, close to Veterans Day. And they flew this flag is 150 by 78 feet. So you're talking, this is the kind of flag you saw at the Super Bowl or you see on a football field. And so we borrowed it that first time, and it just impacted our community in such an incredible way. I say it ignited the spark of patriotism in people. And so this was, and keep in mind, I'm days into my grief, so I'm not even involved. When I say we, I'm being very generous to myself. I had nothing to do with it other than the widow. Friends raised money. They involved the grocery stores and local schools and people, and I think they raised $20,000 or $30,000 in a heartbeat to then have custom made another giant flag like that. And Colonial Flag is a Utah organization that does amazing work with flags all over the world. And they built us this flag that we call the Major, and it flies in the canyon every year between pretty much Halloween and Veterans Day. And people come from all over to hike up this canyon and see it. And no matter how big you think it is, you're still struck by how big it really is. It takes about 100 people to carry it when we roll it up like a really long tent or snake. It's in a cover and a case, and we carry it up the canyon. And then it takes hours of dedication from a group called Honor the Hero. They're a bunch of search and rescue survivalists, riggers, mountaineers, skills I don't have or claim to have, led by Rob Clark. And this group, Honor the Hero, then takes this flag and they put it on a line across a canyon that's about 1,000 feet wide. And while that flag flies, we have several activities that are intended to really focus people on Veterans Day, on service. We do a veterans devotional where we have a speaker and musical numbers to talk about what veterans are, not just deceased, but the living, all veterans, all service members. We have a blood drive where, people who are healthy and in a position to donate blood can emulate the willingness of soldiers to defend life by giving the gift of life. We often go into schools and do different assemblies and things around the community. And we, in conjunction with that, earlier in September, we also hold a 9/11 commemorative event that's very educational. Again, I'm a school teacher at heart, and we create photos and videos and almost like a pop-up museum. But we don't just show the children the museum elements. We bring real firefighters in, and we bring police officers in, and we bring soldiers and Humvees in, and we let those populations cross. I think maybe one of the unique positions I have as a military surviving politician, spouse, mom, all of those things, school teacher, is I lived in a world where politics and business and military intersected every day,
right.
But I'm aware that they don't. Civilians and military don't intersect nearly in our culture, in my opinion. And so we bring hundreds of thousands of students from kindergarten all the way up to college age. We introduce them to military and other uniforms. We introduce them to political leaders and business leaders. And we try to erase some of those divisions and those boundaries that exist between subcultures of our culture. And in doing, I hope, the tagline we use is we try to ignite patriotism through service. And whether that's recognizing the service of someone else or putting 400 volunteers to work serving the community themselves, we feel that the best way to really not just spark patriotism, but ignite it is to put people to work. And you and I know that. Work together, serve together, build something, create something, offer something. And then pretty soon each of those people is forever changed. And watch out, go watch what they'll do and what they'll help someone else do. And the ripple effect is just huge.
We saw this over the last 20 years as we have worked various military spouse initiatives and veteran initiatives. As we create high-wage jobs and place these individuals into this meaningful work, their life changes and their family changes, and it's amazing. It's just,
you're changing generations too, Sean. I would suggest because again, I looked at my own personal history. My mom was a young widow with 4 kids. Her husband was just a civilian who died with a very small life insurance policy. What a difference if that were my case and I didn't have employment or I were underemployed. Now my kids are likely to grow up undereducated, under opportunity, if that's a word. When you have a military family, whether it's a veteran family or a survivor family, if we don't take care of them, we have provided a disservice to generations of Americans. And on the flip side, when you help a military spouse or you help that military child thrive and find pride and honor in their father's service or their mother's service, and then they go on to do amazing things in their own personal career or path, now you've strengthened the entire country for hundreds of years. It's not just, can we get food on the table for the next decade? It is multi-generational.
You're exactly right. I love your passion for this work, and I'm so excited to be working with you on this initiative. It's going to be great. So we'll link all of this into this episode, and let's do another round where, maybe at Fort Benning we again, because there's a lot in the queue that we're working together in terms of funding.
And let's throw out there, Sean, that I'm hoping within 5 years or so, you and I are taking global war and terrorism survivors to Washington, D.C., where there will be a monument. It's been congressionally approved and it's in the fundraising and planning stages. But in my opinion, we're not going to wait till it's ready. Because again, how many Vietnam and World War II veterans saw their memorials in a wheelchair on oxygen?
Or didn't.
Or didn't. A lot of the global war on terrorism soldiers themselves and their family members, a lot of them are my age. They're 40s or 50s or younger than that. I mean, good heavens, we had many father-son combinations or parent-child combinations for 20 years. So yes, let's follow up. Let's have all the important conversations and make it happen.
Jennie, thank you.
But first, I got to get people on the chartered plane.
We're excited. And I'll be in Washington, D.C. next week and working some of these initiatives that we discussed today. Thank you for joining us. And
thanks, Sean.
I look forward to working with you on these initiatives.
Okay, take care. Good luck in Washington. Let me know if I can ever help.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.